Hello everybody and welcome to a new episode on the Hijo de las Calles channel. As always, I apologize in advance for any grammatical or pronunciation errors that may be present in this video. So, with that said, let's get to it. This story recounts the brutal murder of two people in the city of Tijuana on June 7th, 2015. Yulia and Valeria were the mother and sister, respectively, of Anastasia, a young woman who was 19 years old at the time and to whom the double homicide is attributed. Anastasia Lechtchenko Masney is a Mexican woman, daughter of Siberian-born Yulia Masney and Ukrainian-born Igor Lechtchenko. Yulia and Igor met when they both worked as acrobats in the Russian circus. Then they decided to adventure to the other side of the world and choose to settle in Mexico. They arrived in the state of San Luis Potosí, where Yulia gave birth to Anastasia. The Lechtchenko family traveled through several states of Mexico, working in television programs as ballet and music teachers. And it was until the end of the 90s that Igor got a job as gymnastic teacher at the High Performance Center of Baja California and ended up settling in Tijuana. Later, in 2003, little Valeria arrived to the Lechtchenko family, a girl who was born with a disability, and doctors predicted that she would not develop speech and motor functions. This fact affected the family financially and emotionally, because Yulia gave all her attention to little Valeria, due to the care that the child needed, causing an estrangement from her first daughter Anastasia and her husband Igor. The estrangement ended in a separation between Igor and Yulia, and Anastasia decided to stay with her mother. As time passed, Anastasia's relationship with her mother deteriorated more and more. Yulia's attentions to Valeria, due to her illness, irritated Anastasia, and the fights between them became more and more frequent. When Anastasia reached her teenage years, she began to use drugs. She started using marijuana, and soon escalated to methamphetamines. Feeling excluded by her parents, the sadness of being in a broken home led her to increase her drug use. Eventually, the repercussions of her drug use became evident, and Anastasia's parents decided to act. She was admitted to a rehabilitation center, but the trip was short-lived due to her behavior, which made it impossible for the professionals to help her. Faced with this fact, her parents took her home, but in February 2015, Anastasia ran away from home. Mrs. Yulia decided to report her disappearance, and the Center of the Support of Missing and Absent Persons issued a nationwide search alert, and posters were made to find her whereabouts. On February 27th, Anastasia called her mother and told her that she was fine and that she was in Culiacan, Sinaloa, because she had found a job there. Anastasia had lied to her mother. She was not in Culiacan, nor was she working. Instead, Anastasia was still in Tijuana and spent her time getting high with other friends. When she found out that she was wanted, she probably decided to call her mother to stop the search so she could continue her lifestyle. Eventually, Anastasia returned home. The months passed between fights and problems between mother and daughter that became stronger and stronger. This went on until June 7th. According to the first inquiries, the events occur as follows. A witness affirmed that on that day, Anastasia and Yulia were arguing and managed to hear Anastasia tell her mother, "I've had enough of you. I'm going to kill you, motherfucker." She slammed the door and left. That day, she says she went to the beach to watch the sunset, smoke, and then fell asleep. When she woke up, she returned home. Before entering, she went to the yard and took a piece of rope. Yulia was sitting on a couch. Anastasia stood behind her and grabbed the rope around her mother's neck, and leaning her knee on the couch, she began to strangle her. After a while, Yulia stopped breathing. Then, she went to Valeria's room, and with the same piece of rope, she unleashed her fury on her sister. It was around 9 p.m., and Anastasia took her pack of cigarettes and left the house towards the beach again. She ran along the seashore for several minutes until she couldn't take it anymore and plopped down on the sand. She lit a cigarette and stayed there for a while. After 2 hours, Anastasia headed back home, but on the way, she stopped at a drugstore and bought a box of 10 black plastic bags of 70 by 90 centimeters. Upon arriving home, she walked straight to the kitchen, where she selected 3 knives of different sizes and edges. Then, dragged the bodies of the 2 women to the kitchen. She began by cutting out the hearts of both. Then, decapitated them and removed Valeria's eyes. Then flushed them down to the toilet. In one of the statements, Anastasia affirmed that for some time she had been feeling at night itches all over her body and headaches that did not let her sleep. So she was convinced that these symptoms were because her mother and sister were doing witchcraft to her because they wanted to finish her little by little. She then took the knives and began to dismember her mother's body. Then did the same with her little sisters and put the limbs in plastic bags. She made sure to clean up the blood stains on the floor, walls, sink, and knives. That job took all night, and by the time she was done, it was after 7 a.m. the next morning. However, there was only detail that Anastasia had not solved: how to dispose of the corpses. She spent hours and hours thinking about what she would do with them, but she couldn't figure it out. She smoked a few joints of marijuana to distract herself, but when the drug ran out, it became a torment for her until she could not stand it any longer and left home without resolving the matter. By then, 2 days had passed and the bodies began to decompose. It was that stench that alerted the neighbors, who reported the situation to the police. On Thursday, June 11th, agents of the Ministerial Police of Tijuana found the whereabouts of Anastasia Lechtchenko. who was at a friend's house, to whom she had told everything. It was the same girl who had made the anonymous call to the police, informing about 2 bagged bodies at 2231 Ensenada Avenue in the Jardines del Sol suburb. Anastasia Lechtchenko declared to the public prosecutor's office that she murdered her mother and sister because they were doing witchcraft and wanted to kill her. Therefore, she argued that she researched on the internet that witches had to have their hearts cut out and their limbs cut off, so that their spells would no longer have any effect, and that a horrible voice in her mind asked her to finish them off. On the other hand, Mr. Igor Lechtchenko told the public prosecutor's office that he had not lived with his wife and daughters for some time, but he saw them often, although he acknowledged that Anastasia's character had changed a lot in recent years, as she became very aggressive, and almost all the time she was in a bad mood. In the headquarters of the Attorney General's office of Tijuana, the young blonde was subjected to several interrogations. First by investigators from the Deputy Attorney General's office, then by the homicide unit, and finally by personnel from the Russian consulate, to whom she replied in desperation, "I have already told you 1,000 times how everything happened. Leave me alone." However, despite the teenager's confession, the public prosecutor's office stated that there was neither flagrancy nor sufficient elements to arrest the young woman. So after giving her a statement, Anastasia Lechtchenko was not arrested. Indignation and consternation were expressed with outrage in Baja California, because citizens could not understand how a confessed murderer could remain free. However, when the 5th criminal judge, Ana Isabel Flores Plasencia, responsible for releasing Anastasia Lechtchenko, was questioned on the matter, she answered, "I am not evading my responsibility. I am doing my job. The public prosecutor's office handed me an incomplete investigation file. There are missing ministerial rulings which have not been complied with. That is why I do not have enough elements to arrest young Anastasia." It was not until June 19th when an arrest warrant was issued for the accused. That same day, she was arrested when she was walking with some friends in the Mexico Norte Park in Ensenada.
Nombre completo.
Mi nombre completo es Anastasia Lechtchenko.
¿Cuántos años tienes, hija?
19 años.
19 años. ¿Con quién estabas en tu casa ese día?
Me encontraba con mi madrastra y mi hermanastra. Bueno, de apellido igual en los papeles.
Okay. ¿Qué fue lo que hiciste? ¿Y a quién fue la primera que
Cometí
mataste?
2 homicidios en nombre de que eran brujas y me estaban haciendo daño en defensa personal.
Okay. ¿Quiénes son las personas que te estaban haciendo daño?
Son mi mamá y mi hermana.
Okay. ¿Cómo empezaste tú ahora sigue a tu fechoría? ¿Con quién fue la primera?
La fechoría fue...
Homicidio.
Diría defensa personal. Fue primero con una soga a mi mamá para que pues muriera por ahogarse, y luego de la misma manera a mi hermana, pero primero degollé a mi mamá y le corté los brazos y las piernas, y luego hice lo mismo con mi hermanita y le corté los brazos y las piernas.
¿Cuántos años tenía tu mamá y tu hermana?
Mi mamá alrededor de 48 y mi hermana tenía como 13 años, y ella además tenía un síndrome como de atrofia de parálisis de parálisis corporal y pues mi mamá la utilizaba como...
¿Cuál fue el motivo por qué la mataste?
Porque eran brujas y me hacían daño con sus taloches.
¿Qué día fue el día que la mataste?
Aparte, el día hace como 4 días.
¿Hace 4 días? Ok.
¿Qué hiciste con los cuerpos?
Los escondí en bolsas de basura.
¿Bolsas de basura? ¿Ese mismo día o dejaste 1 o 2 días?
Los dejé nomás un día en el que los cortaba.
Ajá.
Y de ahí los dejé atrás y ahí ya quedaron como 4 días.
¿Qué utilizaste para cortarlos? ¿Alguna cegueta, algún cuchillo,
Solamente
algún machete?
cuchillo.
¿Puro cuchillo?
Sí,
Sí. ¿En compañía de alguna otra persona o fuiste tú sola?
sola.
Sola. ¿Le hiciste a alguna amiga, le hiciste a algún pariente algo de lo que había sucedido?
¿A algún pariente algo de lo que había sucedido? No,
Nada.
nada.
¿Alguien te ayudó?
No,
¿Quién te ayudó?
nadie me ayudó. Nadie me ayudó a cometer los suicidios en nombre de...
Meanwhile, on Monday, June 22nd, a mass was commemorated in honor of the victims Yulia Masney and Valeria Lechtchenko Masney at the Santa Maria Isabel del Mar Church in Ensenada, very close to where they lived. There, the media interviewed Mr. Igor, who mentioned that he wanted to help his daughter with her drug addiction. On Friday, June 26th, Anastasia Lechtchenko was taken to La Mesa prison in Tijuana, where she was prosecuted for the crime of aggravated homicide by kinship. 3 days later, Anastasia Lechtchenko Masney, 19 years old, was interviewed in the prison by a journalist. There, the teenager mentioned details and data that she had not said before and that left even more disconcerted society. So, the young woman went straight to the point. The problem was that I pled guilty. The truth is that I have been using drugs for several days, so when I was arrested, the police told me that if I plead guilty, they would release me. That day, some hooded men slapped me several times. I got scared, and then I said that I had murdered my mother and sister, while they recorded me with a camera and their cell phones. Tell me, what happened that day? That day, I arrived at the house, but it was locked. So I remembered that we had some keys hidden in the washing machine, and I went to get them. When I came in, the house was upside down. There were a lot of clothes piled up on the couch, and my room was a mess. So I decided to tidy up the house and started by sweeping the yard. Suddenly, I noticed a strange and unpleasant smell coming from the back hallway. When I got closer, there was a black bag. I opened it, and there were the remains of my mother. I don't know how to say this, but it was horrible. My mother's head was up to the top. Then, what did you do? I called a friend and took her to the house to show her the bags, but she didn't want to look. I told her I hadn't done it. I asked her what we were doing, and she told me to tell the police, and then we went to her house. Hours later, the police came for me. Where did the agents take you? They put me in a car. There they slapped me and kept telling me that it would be better if I plead guilty. That only then would they let me go free. We were driving around and then they took me to some offices or something like that. And there I was raped by more than 4 police officers. I was so drugged that I thought they had arrested me for that. I didn't remember what had happened to my mother and sister. I didn't remember. The problem is that I had confessed to something I did not do, and that is why I am in this situation. I could not say goodbye to them or huge my father. I only remember that they told me, "Tell them that you butcher them." And that was the first thing I said. And the rest was invented and put by them. I am very frustrated because I don't remember many things, and everything has been like a terrible nightmare. Anastasia may or may not be guilty of the facts she was charged with. The truth is that the expert test showed the traces of a genetic profile that belonged to a male. That is, traces of DNA of a man outside the Lechtchenko family on the knives and plastic bags used by the murderer. Anastasia's lawyer, Xochitl de Labra, mentioned that Mrs. Julia had several suitors. It was not for less, because she was very attractive. The jurist handled the hypothesis that maybe one of them had a displeasure with Julia and murdered her. However, she also said that the Attorney General's office of Tijuana did not want to interrogate them, even though they were identified. The lawyer Xochitl de Labra mentioned that it was not possible that Anastasia had the strength to dislocate and dismember the bodies of her mother and sister, much less that kitchen knives were used for such action. There is no viability, almost surgical cuts with kitchen knives. Besides, the kitchen space where Anastasia allegedly dismembered them is very small. They didn't bother to look for real evidence and left a lot of things unfinished. Currently, Anastasia Lechtchenko Masnay is serving an 80-year sentence for the double homicide. And the truth behind this story remains unknown. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribe and leave a comment. Thank you for watching. See you next time.